It's interesting, the Russian invasion of Ukraine is a primarily kinetic war. But what you're saying is that Chinese Communist Party's invasion of Taiwan is likely to be definitely kinetic in maybe in a heavier sense, but also have a pretty strong non-kinetic aspect to it.
I mean, I think the Russians tried that as well, right?
But maybe they're just not as good at it. I mean, they're not as good at
They're
propaganda.
not the Chinese.
I mean,
We're so much better.
Well, I mean, I do admire the Chinese Communist Party's like healthy level of self-confidence, right? It's like, you know what? Other people couldn't do it, but we can, like that's a good place to be for like a normal person, right?
Yeah, that's, it's if the Japanese can play baseball well, and even though we've never played it, we'd be really good at it. That there is this hubris and desperation, or call it what you will, that that you see on the Chinese side. So I think that they would try to, as I said, I think they're just as committed as ever. But that political, psychological aspect of the war really is something that needs to be addressed as much as the hardware end. And in the U.S. side, as mentioned, and is widely known, that we have a couple generations of MBA graduates who've made their entire life has been about deindustrializing the United States and enriching themselves and China for the short term. And that has given the Chinese huge influence in America. And you remember when during the Trump administration, there was that leaked video of a Chinese fella, a high flyer, who was speaking to a group, I think it was back in China, saying that, after Trump did all these things, we called up all our friends on Wall Street and in DC, and they couldn't do anything. But the point is that for so long, the Chinese had got used to the idea that they would have their friends in Washington, cause the Americans to back off. The economic interests were just too great. It was argued between China and the United States. So it really, the Americans just couldn't get involved here. Taiwan was a dispensable irritant, if you ask some people in the State Department and academia, to the more important relationship between China and the United States, and that was how was looked at. So the political angle is one that's it's going to be hard for the Chinese to play, but they may just bite their tongue and say, we don't really care. Certainly the reputation doesn't matter to the Chinese, as behavior has shown.
It's interesting that you were mentioning this, because I feel like this is what they're trying to do now in Europe with the EU, in terms of, trying to convince Europe that China wants to help in some way with Ukraine and Russia, and it's fine for China to be neutral and we're neutral, and trying to convince them that they're neutral when they're supporting Russia. And it seems that the Europeans aren't buying that message as well as the Chinese Communist Party was hoping they would.
That's right. It's really surprised me, and probably a lot of other people, just how the Europeans have, by and large, banded together. Even the Italians and the Germans, and for example, you have the Swedes and the Finns, who are now keen to get into NATO. This has all really been a surprise to a lot of people. And, say China must be wondering just how good they are at the political warfare game. They actually are pretty good at it. But in Europe, the response has really been a surprise. You saw, for example, after the Russians invaded Ukraine, that the BP, British Petroleum, pulled out almost right away of a $25 billion operation in Russia, just without batting an eye. And the financial sanctions which have been put on Russia have surprised a lot of people. The economic sanctions, they're of course not nearly as strong as they should be. There's too many carve-outs. But nonetheless, the willingness of Westerners in particular to engage in what you might call self-harm, so economic self-harm, has maybe raised some doubts on the Chinese side. Maybe they need to reapproach it or just start paying their quislings more. It's hard to say. And even the Japanese have taken on a sort of a pretty strict approach to the Russians. And the Japanese are probably even more frightened of the Chinese than they are of the Russians. But there's also one aspect to these both conflicts, are one real, one potential, and that's the nuclear angle. And remember, it was a sort of a rule of thumb or common wisdom that we wouldn't really do too much to a nuclear-armed, and if it was a nuclear-armed country involved in a fight, well, there's real limits to how much America would do just because of the nuclear threat. Well, you look at what they're doing in Ukraine, and it shows that they're willing to go a lot farther than anyone imagined. And as I mentioned, we're supplying weapons, and Europeans are, and even some others are offering up weapons that are used to kill Russians. That is, there's no other way to put it. And this, despite the fact Russia is a nuclear-armed state. And Putin, of course, is threatening the use of nuclear weapons also. But nonetheless, that hasn't entirely caused the Americans and everyone else just to back off. Not at all. So China must be wondering how well this nuclear card is going to play if they go after Taiwan. Because it could be I don't know how they're going to come out on that, but they just might decide, well, the Russians didn't play it well enough or hard enough, and we will. So we're going to threaten to use them, tell the Americans that we're going to stand, but we're the Russians may have held back, but we're not. So are you willing to take the gamble, America? And they could, who knows? There's any number of options that they could have. Maybe they could say fire a tactical nuclear weapon into the ocean east of Taiwan as a message to the Americans. Stand back. And that includes no resupply. So, and as part of any Taiwanese attack or Chinese attack on Taiwan, you could expect a pretty serious naval and air blockade. And as they would learn from Ukraine, that it's a good thing to keep your opponent from being resupplied. And since all the resupply has to come mostly by sea, some by air, that you can imagine that would be a part of any Chinese thinking. But the nuclear part, I say that is something that when you stop back and think about it, especially if you're, say, my age, you kind of almost have to scratch your head, because we'd always thought that, or a lot of people thought, well, these are theoretical. Nobody would actually think of using them. And now there is some real consideration that the Russians just might use one. So the Chinese will calibrate off of that, and they will play that card, I am sure. It's one way that you try to isolate, you try to intimidate your opponents if in a Taiwan scenario. So the world really this is something that very different that's happened just in the last month and a half.